Hey guys, sorry about that. My internet was doing one of those things where it's like, we're gonna take every single second we possibly can to get going today, but here I am. Hello, it's Maria, Mascara, Mama G, depending on how you know me, and I'm here to talk about some AP Macroeconomics free response tips and tricks. I am going to warn you right now, though, I am going to talk a little bit about multiple choice and the free response section. I'm hopefully nobody minds the extra help with the multiple choice section. So here we go. Don't forget that this is being recorded so you can watch it later and so other people can watch it. If you don't want people to know that you're an econ nerd like me, you might want to change your name. Okay, so, I've got something to show you guys. I hope it plays the sound. You'll have to let me know if it does. Let's see if it works.
What up, AP students? Amanda here from Fileable. We are literally giving away $100 to pay for your AP exam. How do you win? You just gotta post about the AP experience on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter. Use the hashtag #YesWeCram and with Fileable. Tag Fileable. So one person will win every single day, and this is how you can win. It is going to be a group of students who actually judge the winner. They pick the winner. This is how they're going to choose. It has to capture the AP experience. Do they look at that post and think like, that's 100% what this feels like? Is it creative? Is it funny? Does it have a really awesome song in it or really good use of some sort of meme? Anything? Do we see creativity? And engagement? How many likes do you have? That literally is going to help you win. The more likes, the more likely you are to win. And then finally, does it incorporate Fiveable? Is it in the caption, what you're wearing, in something that you're doing? How have you incorporated Fiveable into it? So this is how you can win. A couple of quick notes. Make sure you follow Think Fiveable so that we can DM you to if you've won. You can post as many times as you want. You could post today, tomorrow, every day, as many times during the day as you want, but you can only win once. So keep that in mind. And finally, some of our best social interns came from this contest last year. So if you're really awesome at social media and you're looking for an internship, show us what you've got because we want to hire you. So I can't wait to see your posts. See you on the flip side. Good luck on your exams. Talk to you later.
All right, so that was a fun little announcement from Amanda. She's the founder of, she's playing again. No. There we go. Amanda, she's the founder of Fiveable. She is, I don't know, like the most incredible ever. She's like one of those educators you want to be like. So we're all really lucky to know her and work with her. So hopefully you got some good information about that contest they're having. What a fun and easy way to earn $100 to help pay for those AP exams that you are taking. Don't forget you can connect with Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you of course want to tag Fiveable if you join in that contest, and make sure you use the hashtag she mentioned. And I also know that information is on the website if you're interested in being a part of that. But I highly recommend it because it's like an easy and fun way to earn some cash. Okay, so I want to draw your attention to something on this screen that I never spend very much time with. And the thing I want to draw your attention to is that, well, obviously today is April 24th. But our next CRAM session, which is going to be more about the free response section, is going to be on Thursday, the 29th. And right there, it says it's at 7 p.m. Eastern, but it is not at 7 p.m. Eastern anymore. It is now at 9 p.m. Eastern. First and foremost, I want to apologize to those of you on the East Coast because 9 p.m. Eastern is late. But we're in this world now where we are all slowly returning back to school sites, which makes the current time impossible for me over here in LA. So that's why we are moving it to 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm actually pretty proud that it's the only cram time we've had to move despite my crazy schedule. So Thursday night will be at 9 p.m. Eastern, and that will leave us only our cram finale, yikes, on Mother's Day That one's going to be fun. Another thing I want to mention now, and I'll mention again at the end, is I'm going to put together a free response section. I'm going to base it like off College Board questions, but I'm not going to use their exact questions because you guys can all look at those yourselves. And I am going to get that out to you. Rupi and I will make sure to get it out to you through the Discord early in the week so that you can do those problems before Thursday night at 9 p.m. so that we can use that hour to go through those problems. Okay, so keep an eye out for it. I anticipate having it to you guys by Monday night at the latest. Okay, so that's what we will be doing on Thursday, because today we're not going to do any actual problems. We're just going to talk about how we want to approach things in general. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the AP test structure. In general, I like to think that you guys know these things, but I've learned over the years through my students and my own children that maybe like not every teacher goes over the test structure. And while I hate the idea of teaching to a test, I also think it would be crazy to spend all of this money and all of this effort to take a test and not know in advance what it's going to look like. The best way to conquer the College Board and the AP test is to know what you're going to be facing. So we're going to talk about that test structure. We're going to talk about the structure of the free response section. We're going to talk about in general study tips, some macro lingo, frequent topics. Macro, we're so blessed in macro as compared to like AP World or APUSH, where they could ask you about so many things. There's like a limit to how many things they can ask you about. So we're going to talk about the most popular ones. And then we're going to go through the graphs that you need to know and really spend some time with them. So if you don't have something to write with or write on today, I highly suggest you get it because I will be asking you to write some stuff down on your own paper and also throw some things in the chat as we go through today. So here we go. Let's talk about the test structure. One thing I really love about the AP Macro and the AP Micro exams is that they are short. Some AP tests are like 5 hours. Some of the language tests are like even longer, but this one is not so bad. This is like almost like a kind of final that you could take in high school or in college. So it's not so exhausting. There are two sections in your macro test. The first section is the multiple choice. And in that multiple choice section, you are going to answer 60 questions, 60 questions. And unlike APUSH and AP World, which many of you have taken before, you're going to get more than 1 minute per question, which is really nice. So you get a little bit of a breather here on the multiple choice. So 70 minutes to answer 60 questions. And this is worth a good chunk of your exam score. 2/3 of your exam score is this multiple choice section. So you might be asking yourself, all right, like what do I need to get on this multiple choice section in order to be successful on the AP exam? And the answer is a much lower number than maybe you think it is. I think for the most part, seniors take AP macro, but I know we might have some underclassmen in here. But I think for the most part, we have people that have taken AP exams before. So I think you remember that unlike a test in school where you're always aiming to get 100%, you don't need to get 100% on the AP macro test on any part of it to do well. If you want to get a 3, we want everybody to get at least a 3, right? In those 60 questions, you need to get between 35 and 40 of them correct, which to be honest is like a D in regular school terms, right? In a traditional grading scale. So I want you to remember that when you go into the test and you see those questions, because inevitably there's going to be a handful of questions that you read and then you wonder, did I even take this class? What is this? I've never seen this word before. And one thing that really trips up a lot of people, especially if you're like me and you can get a little bit anxious or you're a little hard on yourself, one thing that can trip you up is getting a question like that and letting it just like psych out your brain completely. You need to not do that because getting one question wrong, not a big deal. Even getting 10 or 15 questions wrong, you can still get a 4 or 5 on the AP exam. So that doesn't mean like, oh, I'm just going to rush through the multiple choice, who cares? But that means when you get to one of those questions where you're like, WTF, I've never seen these words before in my entire life, you're going to take a breath. You're going to see if you can eliminate any of the answer choices. And if you can't, that's fine. You're going to choose something, because you're not going to leave anything blank on the multiple choice section, because there's no reason to leave anything blank. You might just get lucky and you might have the correct answer. And you're going to answer that multiple choice question that's about some subject you've never seen before in your entire life. And you're going to move on to the next question, and you're not going to let it phase you. A lot of being successful in tests like AP exams, SAT, when you get older, GRE, LSAT, MCAT, all those things, is to not be phased by it. It's almost like in athletics. Let's say you play basketball and you go out there and you miss your free throw. You can't let that affect your next free throw. So if you can't get a question, you don't understand it, be okay with that. Pick an answer choice and move on. Okay. I sound like a little bit motivationally. It's kind of a speaker right now and not so econ based, but it really is true. With those 70 minutes and those 60 questions, you don't want to waste a whole bunch of time on something you really don't know. You want to leave yourself time on the questions that you do know, so that you can take an extra few seconds on each one and double check that you have clicked the right answer or bubbled the right answer. Because the ones that you know, you don't want to miss those. Those are the ones you want, right? So instead of rushing through the things you think are the easy ones, you want to give yourself a little bit more time on those to be double sure that you have the correct answer. And this year, this is really important, especially for our digital test takers. So if you are taking the pencil and paper exam, you can go like back and forth in your multiple choice questions as much as you want to. But if you are taking the digital exam, that is not the case. Once you answer a question and you click submit, it'll pop up and be like, are you sure you want to move on to the next one? You're not going to be able to go back to this one. And you click yes again, and then you move on to the next question. And you can never go back to the other questions. So you don't want to rush through them and be like, oh, I'll check them at the end, because you cannot do that on the digital exam. I see a question in the chat. Do the questions progressively get difficult? No. There are some like computer-based exams, depending on what state you live. I know here in California, the way our state testing is done, where the questions get harder. Sometimes the GRE is like that too, where it's trying to figure out your level. So the questions get more difficult until you really can't answer them anymore. But the AP test is not like that. There isn't really a rhyme or reason actually at all to how the multiple choice questions are laid out in the test. It's not by unit or anything like that. So definitely don't let anything phase you if you don't understand it. It's okay. There will be plenty of questions you do understand, and you will do well. So those are my big tips for multiple choice. I only want to talk about multiple choice for a hot minute there, because the free response, I think, is really what can set you apart from other students and really make it possible for you to pass your exam. But you cannot overlook the multiple choice. So just as a quick recap, 60 questions, 70 minutes. You want to get a 3 and you do well on the free response, you can get away with like a 35 out of 60. Where should you be if you want to be comfortable with getting a 3 or a 4? Maybe more like 40 or 45. And don't forget, if you are taking the digital exam, either in the second set of tests or the third set of tests, that you cannot go back and forth on those multiple choice questions. Once you answer one, you have answered it. And that goes for all of the AP exams, not just AP Macro. But that's really important with your testing strategy. Okay, enough with the multiple choice. Oh, and leave none of them blank. I always have to tell this story. So I was proctoring an AP exam one year. This was before my kids were at my school and I was still allowed to proctor AP exams. And it was a subject I knew nothing about. And this student had finished early, and they were just kind of sitting there looking at the wall. And I walked by, and you can't help but like glance at what's going on. And I noticed that there's like a whole bunch of blank answers in their multiple choice section. And I so badly wanted to tell that student to just bubble something in, but I couldn't do that, right? Because that would have been cheating. Don't be that student. Don't leave anything blank. There's no reason to leave anything blank. Okay, now we really are moving on to the free response. The free response section has 3 questions in it. 3 questions. You have 60 minutes to answer the questions and a 10-minute reading period. And look at that, I left out a parenthesis. That's going to drive me nuts. It's actually been driving me nuts for the last 5 minutes that we've been on the slide, so I apologize for that. 60 minutes long. This is worth a third of your exam score. Well, what do we want to score here? We'll talk about that on the next slide because we are going to go way more in depth here on the free response structure. So you're going to have your multiple choice, 70 minutes. You get like a little bit of a break, 5 or 10 minutes, and then you take your free response section. So let's look at the free response here, if for no other reason than to get off the slide with the missing parentheses. Okay, here we are. Free response structure. There are 3 questions. One of them is long. It's not that long, but it's longer than the other 2. And the other 2 are short. That long question is worth 50% of the free response section. So I did a little fancy math. If your free response section is worth a third of your score, and this is worth half of that score, then this is worth 1/6 of your total exam score, which makes it pretty important. That's the difference between a 4 and a 5, or a 3 and a 4, or a 2 and a 3. There are very few differences between the paper and pencil exam and the digital exam, but this is one place where there is a difference. On the pencil and paper exam, first of all, you get all the 3 questions together and you can just take them and you're good. And you can go back and forth and use your time as you want. The long question is going to come first on the pencil and paper exam. But on the digital exam, the long question is going to come last. So you need to be very cognizant of the fact that you need to save yourself time to answer that long question. For those of you who are familiar with APUSH or AP World, or have taken an AP test where they give you some of your essays together, you're used to being able to go back and forth on them. In APUSH and AP World, you get your LEQ and your DBQ together, right? So you get to divide your time as you want to. So maybe you've experienced that before. But here, because for those of you that are online, the understanding that I have gathered from the College Board in my research is that you will not be able to go back and forth between these questions in the digital exam, which means, like I said, you need to be cognizant of your time and in leaving yourself enough time to answer that long question, as it is the last one you're going to get. There are also 2 shorter questions. Each one of those is worth 25% of the free response section, which makes them worth 1/12 of your total exam score. Those you have technically 12.5 minutes, 13 minutes, something like that each. That's about how much time you want to spend on those short questions. In the pencil and paper exam, those will be questions 2 and 3, but in the digital exam, those will be questions 1 and 2. So why is the long one worth more? Well, it's longer. It's not necessarily that it's like weighted heavier. It's just that there's usually a lot more sections to those questions than there are to the shorter questions. So the most important thing is to be cognizant of the fact that there is a longer question coming, and not thinking, oh, well, this question looked like this and question 2 was also the same length, so I don't need much time because question 3 will look just the same. Because it won't. It's going to be long. So that's really important to keep in mind. Okay. So that's what you're going to experience. 3 questions. Pencil and paper, or paper and pencil exam, you can go back and forth and answer them in whatever order you want. Digital exam, as far as I can tell, that is not the case. You will need to answer them in the order that they are presented to you. So, general study tips. Some of you are like, I don't know, 2 weeks away from your test, and others of you are 3.5 weeks away, and some of you are 5 weeks away. Wherever you are, whatever your test is, can you start? Oh, here's another question. Can you start writing during the reading period? No. Unlike the DBQ section where you can, no. So really, you can write. I should rephrase that. You can make notes like on paper and like outline, but you're not writing like your actual response at that time. Nor do I really think you should. I think you should take a chance to like look at the questions and see what is ahead of you before you start actually writing. They can be a lot pickier about that on the digital exam because it literally won't let you write during that time. So they're gonna, now that I think about it, as I think about this logically. So remember that these digital exams, like in theory, we had them last year, but they were different than they are this year. This kind of a new thing for all of us, but they're gonna have to show you all three questions together during the reading period. So you'll have a chance to kind of look ahead and see what's coming and where you want to spend your time. And I really highly suggest you take the time to plan, because if you plan it out, you will be much more successful. Sometimes when we just jump in and we don't pay attention to what else is going on, i.e., we start writing when we have this planning time, I think you guys are really doing yourself a disservice. So I would take the time to really plan out your attack. But before we get to your real exam, what should you do for AP Macro? How can I study for this test? I find this to be an easier test to study for because of how the free response section is structured. But here's what I would do. My suggestion to you. I would take a practice exam. And there's going to be a slide about this. We'll go in more depth about it. And there is a released exam. And I definitely put the link in the slides. And I don't know if you guys are going to be able to click on that. So I will do my best to also put the link in the chat. But it is through the College Board. They released like the 2012 test, which was, yes, a long time ago. But good news, the AP macro exam has not changed very much in the last few years. Take that practice test. Then you're going to review important vocabulary terms. We're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk to you about the released FRQs and how useful those are in macro, much more useful than they are in other AP subjects. Okay, so let's talk about taking a practice exam. So in front of you here is this link, and I don't think you guys are going to be able to click it. So what I wonder is if I am, no, I went too far. I will make sure that link ends up in Discord so that you guys can have it. You can also just Google AP Macro Practice Exam 2012, and it will come up on the College Board website. Take that practice exam. When you take it, you want to replicate your exam environment. What does that mean? That means if you are taking the pencil and paper test, that release exam actually also includes an answer sheet, so you could actually bubble answers. Oh, awesome. Awesome that you guys have access to this link when you download the PDF of the slides. Yay. Okay. So you're going to, if you're taking the pencil and paper exam, I highly suggest you actually print out the answer sheet and actually bubble as you go. You don't need to fill out all the other information on there, but just actually replicate that idea. If you are taking it digitally, I would not worry so much about the bubble sheet. I would make sure that I am not looking ahead at multiple choice questions and not going back and forth. I would give myself the same parameters that I would have in the exam. Also, time-wise, the same parameters. Also, with the exam environment, if you're taking that test at home and you're taking it digitally, where are you going to sit? What device are you going to use? This is a reminder, you can't take your AP tests on phones or iPads this year like you could last year. So are you prepared for that? What room are you going to be in? Have you told everybody to leave you alone when you take that test? All those things. All right, you want to replicate that whole environment. If you're taking the pencil and paper test at school, I would just maybe sit at your dining room table or breakfast counter or whatever, somewhere where there isn't really anything else, and in front of you I would just have your test questions and your bubble sheet. I would make sure to stay in the time that they would give you. Set a timer on your phone, so that you can see the time. And you guys will know your schools better than I will, but every school's kind of different in how they do or how they show you how much time you have left. Some people think it's really scary. I think it's super useful, but I remember when I was in high school, and sometimes my school uses the gym for AP exams, and they literally put the time up on the scoreboard so you can watch it tick down. And for some people that is anxiety inducing, and for others of us, we like knowing how much time we have left, but kind of get an idea of how you think your school is going to keep time. Um, if you happen to somewhere in your house or somebody in your family have a watch, like a regular watch, it cannot be one of those fancy digital watches that does other things, but just a watch with like an hour hand and a minute hand. That's also really useful to have too, so you can pay attention to how much time you have. Um, After you take your practice exam, don't just take it and be like, okay, I took my practice exam. You actually have to do something with the information. So in that at that website, it not only has the questions, right, but it has all the answers. So you can go back and you can grade it. And then you can go and look at all of the questions, the multiple choice questions you got wrong, and kind of think about why you got them wrong. To be honest, I would go over every answer again, because I think sometimes we get multiple choice questions right just by chance. And then we don't go back and look at them. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we do that. That's why I tell my students sometimes it's better to get something wrong than it is to get it right. Because when you get it wrong, you ask yourself, why did I get this wrong? How can I make sure that doesn't happen in the future? So I challenge you to also look at the questions you got right and ask yourself, why did I get this question right? Is it because I guessed on it? Do I still need to learn the information? Right? Or did I genuinely know what was going on? So after you do that, you should analyze what topics you think you can improve on. And here I wrote, think opportunity cost. So if we all remember, everything we do has a cost. If I decide to study econ, then I must be giving up something else. Perhaps I'm giving up studying for my AP Gov exam, because in my mind, I have decided that my time is better spent studying for AP Macro than for AP Gov. I'm more likely to pass that exam. It does me more good. Well, the same thing can be true within AP Macro as you're looking through the topics. Some of them are things that are hard for you or hard for everybody, and it would take you a lot more time to master those. So make sure you have the other ones mastered first. So use that time wisely as you're choosing which topics you can improve on, just like you use your time wisely when you're taking your multiple choice test, right? So keep that in mind. For the free response, they give you scoring guidelines. Definitely look at those. Definitely score it the way they would score it. In the end, there's a scale on there where you convert all of your scores, and then it gives you like a number of points, and then it tells you how many points is a 5, how many is a 4, how many is a 3, whatever. You can get overall like a 55 to 60% on this exam overall and still pass with a 3. You can be in like 80-85% and pass with a 5. Definitely don't sell yourself short. You can all pass this test. I think that macro is one of those things you could even start studying today and pass the AP exam, because there is not as much content and it's more straightforward than other tests. And the free response section is kind of predictable, which we're going to talk about in a minute. I forgot to tell you guys earlier what kind of free response scores you want. So it changes from year to year, but in general, the long question is out of 10 points and the shorter questions are each out of 6. There is some give and take there from year to year though. But I would definitely say a 6 out of 10 on the long question, and between the two short questions out of 12, like 8 out of 12 will put you in a really good spot for getting a good score on the exam. So once again, you don't need to be perfect. So release that need for perfection from your body. I've been telling myself to release my need for perfection for years. It is much easier said than done. Okay, so key macro vocab. I did a Google search for important macro terms. Oh my goodness, there's so many Quizlets out there. Some of them have upwards of 150, 200 words. I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of words like that. I'm here to remind you that there are some economic ways to say things. And I know for the most part, I don't always use the economic terms. But if you want to really show them you know what you're doing when you're writing out your answers on the exam, use those terms. For example, don't say, I moved the graph. I might tell you to move the graph, but what I really mean is that you're shifting the curve. Okay? Does that mean they're not going to give you points if you say move the graph? No. Do you sound a lot smarter, and are they more quick to hand you points and think all your answers are fantastic if you use their lingo? Absolutely. Okay, you don't say spending goes up. You say spending increases. You don't say people started buying more stuff. You say consumer spending increased. Or the government cut back on programs. All right. You can say that, but you should also say which caused government spending to decrease, or say government spending decreased. Use the econ lingo. Use increase, use decrease, use shift. Talk about curves instead of like graph in general. It really makes the reader, the greater think you know that you've mastered the topic, and that's what you want to show when you're answering your free response questions. You also want to be like as obvious as possible when you answer questions. You don't want to beat around the bush here. So think about the person that's grading your AP exam. First of all, they're called readers. So I'm going to call them readers, which sounds weird for AP Macro because there's not a lot of reading involved. But those AP readers, they are reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of AP exams. I'm a reader for the AP World exam. Last year I read like 673 or something like that DBQs. That's a lot of DBQs to read. Make your reader's life easy. Be obvious. They want to give you points. Don't make them have to search for your answers. Make those answers obvious. Be like, ding, 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 here is my answer. So that they can give you those points that you have earned, those points that you deserve. So make it easy on your readers so that you can pass your test. All right, let's talk about frequent topics. There's a lot on that list. But it's really, in comparison to other exams where there's like thousands of things they could ask you about, this is actually a pretty short list. So the cool thing about AP Macro is that this list is relatively short. And the questions do change from year to year, but there's only so many ways they can ask them. So one of the study tips I gave you was to do the released FRQs. I actually think if you don't do anything else, if you can go through at least the last 5 years of questions on the College Board website, that will infinitely increase your chances of passing this exam. If you want to get really crazy, I would go over the last 10 years of questions. And you're like, that is a lot of questions, lady. I don't want to answer 30 free response questions. That's fine. Do the last 5 years. It's 15 questions. You will almost definitely see at least one question that looks like one of the questions from the last 15 years on your exam next month. I guarantee it. So it seems kind of silly to not take the time to go back and work through the past questions. Not only are they all on the website, the College Board website, but they also provide you the scoring guides. So you know exactly how to score and exactly what they are looking for. So take the time to go through those. Today is April 24th, right? If you're taking the paper and pencil exam, that's the first one. That one's on May 10th. So 10, you got 16 days, 15 days. Oh my gosh, you have exactly the right number of days to do one free response question a day. Do them, I beg of you. Seriously. And if you're lucky and you're taking the digital exam, awesome. Still do one a day. And you can go even further. You can do even more questions than the people taking the pencil and paper exam. Okay, so enough of saying that, but like really, it's kind of silly if you don't use that. Okay, so that first bullet point there, the aggregate model, you got to know this one. In like the last 20 years, there's only like 1 or 2 years it hasn't been on the test. You must know the aggregate model inside and out. Not only is it almost always a free response question, it is always almost always question number 1. Oh, as some of you are taking more than one AP test, but I'm going to stop your brain from exploding right now, Harrison. By the way, Harrison is like my favorite in Discord, and when he comes to visit our streams, I'm 99% sure Harrison is smarter than I am. So it always keeps me on my toes. This suggestion for the free response questions is really specific to macro, or if you're also taking micro, specific to micro. I can't speak to all AP exams, but I can tell you for like the other um, ones that fall in the social science category that this tip is not as useful, because like I wouldn't do a DBQ every day between now and the APUSH test. That would be silly. There's no way to know what the topic would be, right? But in micro and macro, like the questions become very similar, which is why I suggest it for this test. So I don't know enough about like the sciences or whatever to know if it's useful there, but it's definitely useful when it comes to macro. Okay, so back to our aggregate model. If you don't know the aggregate model, like just go home. No, I'm just kidding. Learn the aggregate model if you don't know it. It is almost definitely going to be a free response question, is almost definitely going to be part of the last one. Causes and effects of currency valuation. You'll see that here in a short question for the most part, and it won't be like the whole question is about it. So if that's something that confuses you, you can relax because the questions are separated like part A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or whatever, right? And you can get points like A, C, F, G, you miss one in the middle. They don't build on each other in such a way that if you miss one, you can't continue answering. So that causes effects of currency valuation is one that comes up in some of the sub questions. The loanable funds market, monetary policy. But what they really love to ask about is open market operations. There are some questions about the reserve requirement and setting the interest rate and things like that, and what kind of monetary policy would they use, or what type of fiscal policy would they use. But they love open market operations. If you don't remember, open market operations is the buying and selling of bonds. Sometimes they call it securities. Don't be confused. It's all the same thing. They love to ask about interest rates, especially how an interest rate will change something. So if the interest rate is higher than we thought it was going to be, or if the interest rate goes up, what will that happen? Or if the interest rate goes down, what will happen? So really taking that cause and effect. The Phillips curve is popular, money market, Forex, the balance of payments account, yay, BOPA. Remember, with the current account and the CFA account. Long run adjustments. The PPC has been on there. It's not on there too often, but it has been. Multipliers. If you add up all the times that multipliers have been on there, all the multipliers together, it would be higher on the list. But if you take it separately, like just the money multiplier, or the tax multiplier, the spending multiplier, you'll see them once every few years or so. Occasionally questions about unemployment or the natural rate of unemployment, comparative advantage, inflation. So if you are looking at this list right now and there's something on there where you're like, I can definitely not answer a free response question on that topic, that gives you kind of an idea of what you'd like to review. But seriously, this test is set apart from the others. My AP World students asked me the other day, do you know what unit our DBQ will be from? I have no idea. There's like 600 years worth of history that their DBQ could be on, and it could be on anything from all over the world, and it could be on the most minute little thing, or it could be super broad. It's hard to prepare them for it because you have no idea. That's the joy of AP Macro. You have some idea of what's coming because there's only so much they can ask you about. All right. So right in front of you is a list of, I don't even know how many are here, 7 graphs. 7 graphs. You will do yourself a disservice if you walk into that test unable to produce these 7 graphs. So today we're going to look at the graphs, but I definitely challenge you between now and your exam several times to just take this list and to draw out those graphs. Don't look at the internet, don't look at your notes, just from your head, to really learn what these graphs look like. And it's not just what they look like, but they're labels. So on the pencil and paper exam, when it asks you to draw a graph, you get a whole bunch of what I think are free points, easy points, for properly labeling your graph. Yes, Harrison, the DBQ will be from units 3 through 9, but unit 3 begins in like 1450. So it's 1450 to 2001 or something like that. It's still a long time period. Harrison, you cracked me up. I want to be your friend. Okay, so draw these graphs. They give you points for labeling them. That means labeling the axes, the x-axis, the y-axis. Every time I've gone through a graph with you guys, and when I go through it with my students, I love to say over and over again how they're labeled. And I think that you guys and my students are probably like, yeah, lady, we see it on the screen. Like, stop talking about it. I say that because so many people lose out on so many easy points on the AP exam because they cannot label their graphs properly. So, test yourself over and over again. Draw out these graphs, learn them, learn the labels on the graphs. If you're taking pencil and paper, you're going to have to draw the graph. If you are doing the digital exam, you do not have to draw the graph. And at first that made me sad because I thought that's where my students are going to really excel because I really talk about it so much. And then I realized that even though you're not going to have to draw the graphs, you're still going to have to label the graphs in the digital exam. There's still the points for labeling. So they're going to give you a graph and there'll be lines on it and stuff, but it won't say what the lines are. It won't tell you what the x-axis is or what the y-axis is. You're going to have to tell them in your answer what those axes are. So you must learn these things, yes? Okay, so we're going to go through these graphs right now. We only have like 15-ish minutes left, but for each one, I want you in the chat as we go, or on your paper or whatever, to tell me what really sticks out to you when you see the graph. So let's look at the first one together, and I'll give you an example of what I'm looking for you to think about right now. All right, first of all, here's our aggregate model. The one on the right is like super important with our 3 lines. So what jumps out at you here? The kind of things I would like to see in the chat is like, oh, there are 3 curves in this graph. The y-axis is price level, right? The x-axis is real GDP. You need to know that at the LRIS down at the bottom, that YFE, that means we're at full employment. These are the things that I hope jump out at you when you see these graphs. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to do it for this first one, although you totally can. But as we're looking at the rest of the graphs, I would love to see you guys throw out some information here in the chat about what you notice about these graphs. Okay, so I put this one first because it's like the most important graph you could know. But what I'm showing you right now is the aggregate in equilibrium, the aggregate model in equilibrium, because our three lines, our aggregate demand, our LRAS, and our SRAS, they're all coming together. By the way, when you label this graph, you don't need to write long run aggregate supply. You can write LRAS. That's totally fine. Okay, as long as you understand what it is for when you have to answer questions about it. So here we are in equilibrium, yes? But almost always when they ask you about aggregate, they tell you that we're not in equilibrium, which makes these graphs important. What does it look like when we're not at equilibrium? What they might they go two ways with this. Sometimes they give you a graph and they say to explain what's going on in the economy. So they might give you that graph there on the left with the recessionary gap and ask you what's going on in this economy just by looking at the graph. Other times they'll tell you a scenario and ask you to draw a graph to match said scenario. So they might tell you an economy is in an inflationary gap. What would that look like? And that's when you would draw this graph. We actually had a question like that I worked through with my students the other day. Oh, I love that I'm getting some stuff here in the chat talking about what you guys see on these graphs. But we were working through a problem from unit 5. And the kids were excited when they were first reading the problem because it's like, oh, an economy's in recession, and it's like telling them to draw a graph, and they were really thrilled. And then they realized it said to draw the Phillips curve and not the aggregate graph. And then everybody was like pretty bummed because they were so ready to draw this aggregate graph. And that's how I want you to feel. I want you to feel so ready to draw these graphs. Okay, so notice when we're in a recessionary gap, our SRAS AD equilibrium is to the left or before LRAS. And in our inflationary gap, our equilibrium between SRAS and aggregate demand is to the right or beyond the LRAS. All right, great. So I'm going to switch the screen and we're going to look at the next graph. The money market. So let's get some first impressions. It's like when you watch The Masked Singer and they kind of make guesses about who they think it is before they know anything. So your first impressions here of this money market graph. What do we notice? The hardest part of teaching online is the silence while I wait to see what people notice. At least in a classroom, I can see the faces, I can see the pencils moving. I know somebody's doing something. All right, so IR, yes. Here on the money market, it's just the interest rate. But in another graph, you're going to notice it's the real interest rate. So I'm glad that you noticed right here that IR, it's just the nominal interest rate. If there's no R in front of it, it's just the nominal rate. All right, so here the money market graph shows an inverse relationship between interest rates and quantity of money. Yes, interest rate is on the y-axis. Yes. What about that supply curve? What do we notice about this supply curve? One thing that you'll find amongst all of these graphs is that the y-axis is always like the price, but the way the term they use for price changes depending on what we're talking about the price of. So here we're talking about the quantity of money, and the price of money is the interest rate you pay on the money. Where like when we're talking about specific goods, it's just the quantity and the price. But there's that relationship between the two. The y-axis is how much it costs to get whatever's on the x-axis. This is the nominal interest rate. So when it just says IR, you assume that it is nominal. But what I really hope you guys notice here is that our supply curve is a vertical line, straight up and down. And yes, it does show a constant quantity of money, and it is separate of the interest rate. Great work there. So our demand curve for money looks like every other demand curve, but that supply curve, not so much. It looks a lot like LRAS. So it's really important to remember that this supply curve is going to be a vertical line and not an upward sloping line. You guys are doing a great job. Let's look at our next graph. Dun, 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 dun. Loanable funds market. Now, seeing as how we just looked at the money market, you should already see some differences between the money market and the loanable funds market. So what do you notice here that's different from our last graph? I'll give you guys a second to think and put some stuff in the chat, and I will enjoy the silence. Very nice, Harrison. Real interest rate this time. It says RIR. Does the College Board care if you mark these with the correct terms for interest rate? Yes, they do. They definitely want just nominal or interest rate on the money market. And they definitely want real interest rate on the loanable funds market. Okay, because those are two different things. So it's really crucial that you notice this one is RIR, real interest rate. What else is different on this graph than on the last graph? My son is definitely playing video games, and I don't know if you guys can hear him, but if you can, I apologize in advance. The downside of the silence is that we hear the other noise in the house. Okay, so real interest rate and the quantity of loanable funds versus the quantity of money. Very nice, Natalia. Also, the supply is complementary of real interest rate and quantity of loanable funds. Yeah, it's moving up. We have a positively sloping line here. This looks a heck of a lot more like your traditional supply and demand graph, right? And essentially, this is the supply and demand, but only of loanable funds. So the price of borrowing money, which is what loanable funds are, is the real interest rate. So very nice, very nice. In interest of time, we better move on to our next graph. Dun, dun, dun. What is the next one? My favorite, she says sarcastically, the Phillips curve. So what do we see here on the Phillips curve? This is like the only graph that doesn't follow my price and quantity theory on our axes. So what do we see here? Stagflation. Oh, good old stagflation's my favorite. There is an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. I tell my students you can't have low inflation and low unemployment. Dun, dun, dun. You have to choose which one you want. So over here on our y-axis, we have our inflation rate. Here we have Natalia chiming in the LRPC is linear, the SRPC having an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. Yes, very nice. This is a graph that it's important to sometimes pause and think about logically, because that question that my students were doing that talked about a economy in a recession and where would they be on the Phillips curve, right? And when we looked at the aggregate graph, the where point A is on an aggregate graph, if that was where the supply and demand met and it was before LRIS, you'd be like recession. But on the Phillips curve, It's the opposite. So that point before the LRPC, that is inflationary. You're in an inflationary gap. And that point B after the LRPC, then we're in a recessionary gap. So you have to be very mindful of that. But if you just look at it logically, that's quite simple because duh, if we're in an inflationary gap, we have a higher inflation rate. And if we're in a recessionary gap, we have a higher unemployment rate. So it's really quite logical. But we are so stuck into seeing a point before the vertical line meaning one thing that you have to make sure to take the time to know which graph you're looking at and what that graph means. But very good there. Let's see what's next. The foreign exchange market. By the way, on this one, just some tips on that y-axis. It is like the exchange rate or the cost of getting this foreign currency. This graph shows euros to dollars. It does not have to show euros to dollars. It is going to show some kind of foreign currency to dollars, though. And then on the x-axis, you have the quantity of US dollars. So essentially, the y-axis is the price of getting said dollars. And then here we have supply and demand, again, that look like our traditional supply and demand. So the most important thing in this Forex market when you are graphing or labeling is understanding the labels that are going to go on that y-axis and that x-axis. All right, we're going to keep moving because it's 12:58. Oh, no. Oh, the business cycle. Okay, this isn't like a graph like the other ones. But they might ask you to draw one. Or they might show you one and show you a point on it and ask you what's going on. So it's still important to know it. Obviously, we're not labeling axes here like we were in the other ones. But being able to know the terms, to know what the peak is, to know what the trough is, to know when it's contracting or expanding, and how that connects to recession and recovery, and how that might connect to our fiscal and monetary policy. If we're at a peak and we want to slow down the government, we have contractionary policy because it's a period of contraction. If we're in a trough and we're trying to stimulate the economy, then we have expansionary fiscal and monetary policy to bring us back up to the peak. So you still need to be familiar with this, even though it's not a traditional graph. And then this is our last graph. I saved the first one for last because this is probably the first graph you really looked at in AP Macro aside from the production possibilities curve. This is our generic supply and demand graph with our quantity there in the x-axis and our price in the y-axis. Understanding that graph is important because it's the basis for all the others. Okay, so question here. Will they ever ask us to draw a business cycle? They certainly could. Will they? Less likely to see it in the free response than you are in the multiple choice. But if you look at every list of the top graphs of AP Macro that anybody has ever put together, it always ends up on there. So while I doubt that they're going to have you draw it, I would be remiss to not include it. And I also always have this sinking feeling. This happens especially in AP World, where I tell the students, they for sure will not ask you about that on your test. Almost guarantees that they'll put it on the test, so then we learn it anyway. So I would say unlikely, but possible, which is not a very fun answer, but it's a very honest answer. Okay, awesome. We survived. You guys are great. I love all your comments in the chats. I love being with you guys. I wish I could do this full time instead of my real job. No, that's a lie. I love my real job too. I wish I could do this instead of grading papers. But I hope that you guys continue this conversation in Discord with Rupi. I know she's got some free response practice for you. And just a reminder that I will be sharing a free response section, so 3 questions worth by Monday at the latest for you guys to do on your own so that we can work through those problems on Thursday night. That's April 29th. We'll be meeting at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. You can totally watch the NFL draft in the background, or you can celebrate my son's birthday that night with me and all those fun things while we do free response questions. But I know it's going to be great. Thank you as always. Have a wonderful rest of your Saturday. Bye, friends.